Hey, I just realized something very interesting about history. So I was reading this book about history, and there was this thing that teachers who are exceptional and great don't necessarily make students who are great and just as good as the teachers are. So the students, they are supposed to be standing on the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And if both you and I, we're kind of the same people probably if we're enjoying the same topic like this video about stuff, history. We love standing on the shoulders of other people. So like we're studying, we love reading, and know how information and knowledge stands above other information and stands another information on top of that, and someone stands on top of that, and it creates this such a thick and complex body of knowledge that is just beautiful. And one day we hope that by reading all these things, we will one day be standing on the shoulders of those giants. But I realized there is I was reading about Plato and Aristotle. They had shitty students. And there is another character that I'm sure if you haven't heard of Plato and Aristotle, you heard of Alexander the Great. We all know he had shitty successors. He died and his empire just blew up. It just disintegrated. And a few generations after that, it just disappeared. And we have other examples that are better than the empire of Alexander in terms of continuing the continuous, like the Roman Empire, for example. So we have that fact that the students of great people don't necessarily become great. Of course, we all know that Alexander is the student of Aristotle, and Aristotle is the student of Plato. But the thing is, obviously, a teacher doesn't have just one student. Plato has many students, so does Aristotle. And if Plato and Aristotle are great figures in philosophy, Alexander is the same, but in politics and statesmanship and making a country, or like war, for God's sake. But the thing is, in Plato's case, only one student got as big as him. And in Aristotle's case, only one student got as famous as him, or even surpassed him. So what happened to all the other students? Most of the other students just kind of copied their teachers. Some just repeated what they said. Some just tinkered with it just a tiny bit. Well, I believe in the same thing Plato did, but with a tiny difference with his this. Oh, promise me, guys, this is important. Well, history deems that no, they were not important in the end. Like, they only get one page, like a tiny bit of a page. It means that they're not important. So, why is this? Why is it? Isn't it supposed to be that if we are students of smart people, we ourselves should be smart? Well, I have a few theories about this. First, why the students don't end up great as their teachers. First is that they just take their teacher for granted. So, especially in times of ancient times, they had to think about lots of things by themselves from the ground up. Like, why does my hand have 5 fingers? Probably. Why do they think? They're probably thinking about that. Like, why does my booger fall down when I sneeze? Why does it not fall out? They're probably thinking about these things. And like some of them thought about atoms and like everything is made out of atoms. But some people think that everything is made out of the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and wind. So they're thinking about this from the ground up. And especially so about Aristotle, he really thought about everything, like why everything exists. My theory is that most of his students just took this for granted and they didn't retrace his steps in a sense. of like how my teacher probably thought of this from nothing. Because Aristotle and Plato created a system, a beautiful system, like this thing causes this thing in nature, and this transplants to our ethics and our way of life. That this is what humans should do, what is a good thing a human should do, what is a bad thing for a human, how they should act with their family, how they should act with people, how a country should be made. So it's interrelated knowledge, right? And maybe the students just really took them for granted. Like, of course, this is how we should do things as good. Of course, this is how bad things are supposed to be. But back then, we didn't know what bad things were, what good things were, because there are so many opinions. Some people said, whatever makes you happy is good. But some people said, no, just because you're happy doesn't mean it's good. Like cocaine, for example. Back then, there was no cocaine. There was probably like indulging in the senses, indulging in pleasure. This is not good. The people who restrain themselves, they have a clear mind, and because the only thing that separates human from animals is the mind, so therefore the clearer the mind, the more human you are, the better you are. So back then people didn't know what was good and what was bad. And this has happened today. We just take what is good for granted, what is bad for granted. Just because everybody says it's good, we just say it's good, which is okay, which is this is a community thing, right? Of course, you don't want to be the oddball like, bad morning, I'm gonna be naked today. I'm gonna walk down naked. Some son of a gun, he went to the mall with a swimsuit, like with a swimsuit that you could see his dick dangle. Why would you do that? Clearly, he's challenging what is good and what is bad. Maybe we should do that too, in a sense. And like we should retrace the steps of how people thought of what is good and what is bad. Why did the Christian value become like this? Because obviously God, I'm a Muslim, so I believe that God has given us values. But we have interpreted them in certain ways, right? Why did we interpret them this way? At some point, we'll have to be wise men, and we have to understand the interpretation, and we have to retrace the steps. At the first place, why did they interpret this as good, and why this as bad, and why did they interpret it in this way in opposition to that way? So we have to, so that is the first hypothesis of why students weren't as good as their teachers. So the second hypothesis I have is that they just didn't put in the effort. They just suck at philosophizing. So I already told you about how Plato and Aristotle and even Alexander, he created a magnificent army and empire. They created a beautiful system, right? That takes quite a lot of effort. And you could say talent. And probably the students just didn't put in that much effort. Say, maybe he could have just reconstructed the whole thing piece by piece. Like, he doesn't have to think everything from the start. He does have a teacher. He can just inherit knowledge from his teacher. But he can put so much effort into it. Like, he can reconstruct the whole thing. Aristotle did that to Plato. Aristotle was a student of Plato, but his philosophy is completely different. In fact, he attacked and he created so many ideas that were in antagonism with the philosophy of Plato. And you could say also beautiful, so both were beautiful. But the students who didn't make it, they just probably didn't think of it as much as Aristotle did of his teacher. Which means that, their philosophy is half-baked and useless probably. Like, why would you listen to these guys if you already have Aristotle? You have to make something more. You have to improve upon it. Or you have to attack it systematically, bring it apart. Even, if you were a personal student, you could have linked it to the experience of Aristotle. Why could he think this way? He's this kind of guy. Why did he think that? Maybe guys who think like this will make You know, that is my second hypothesis. They just didn't put in enough effort. So maybe if they didn't have talent, maybe Aristotle and Plato and Alexander are a one in a quadrillion billion people chance of talent, a one in a million. But you could put in effort that will counteract that talent. Like, you're probably not stupid. You have intelligence. You're all right. Like, there are many people less fortunate than you, and you're quite normal. So you can probably could put in quite lots of effort to make sure that the system you're trying to create is quite beautiful as well. And say if Aristotle made something quite beautiful in 30 years of life, he could put in 40 years of life. And like, if he worked 6 hours a day, he could work 8 hours a day. And it sounds like bad, like it sounds like hustle culture, but it's fun. Aristotle probably had a lot of fun writing tons of books. He wrote tons of books, but he wrote tons and tons of books. This is back then. And he had fun. Would you rather like slack off? Or would you like create your own masterpiece? Like 8 hours would be nothing. You probably would be spending 12 hours, or like you would be waking up and you would already be thinking about it. Which is probably not something that the students did. The students who didn't make it probably didn't think as much. That is my second hypothesis. And also my last hypothesis. I don't know. Maybe we just didn't care about them. So that is why I think that just because you're a student of a teacher doesn't mean you'll be as smart as a teacher. You have to either put in the work to understand why the teacher thought so, and to make a full experience of understanding the whole experience of the teacher before you can stand on his shoulder. So before you stand on the shoulder of the teacher, you have to scale his pants, his torso, and then you can reach the shoulders and stand upon them. The second is just love the craft, put in the effort, put in the time, put in the love, and keep on thinking about it if you're a philosopher, and put in the effort. So if you want to be as great as your teacher, or whoever you want to be as great as, don't just take them for granted. Understand why they did that. And not only will you understand, you will also be able to attack his beliefs, what he did, his actions in the past. And you can attack it, and you can reform it and make it into something your own. Your philosophy will not be Neoplatonism or Neo-Alexander. Your philosophy will be you. Aristotle is not Neo-Plato. He is Aristotle, and therefore you will be you, not Neo-Plato, Neo-Hegel, you, blah, 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 blah. It'll be you. So, yes, don't take your teachers for granted, and make sure you understand it and make your own stuff.